brief update. But I'm going to multitask while I'm doing this. Okay, so, hope everybody had a great Christmas, and, Happy New Year for everybody. Happy New Year. Hopefully it'll be a Happy New Year for everybody, and we don't get nuked. That kind of thing. So, you think, okay, so Christmas holidays, politicians went home, nobody's fighting, it's time of peace and love and all that stuff, and the baby Jesus and all that stuff. And things are good in the world, eh? No. There's the Russians have responded to Resolution 758, the Ukrainian Freedom Act or whatever it is, which is basically a declaration of war, especially resolution, part of the resolution number 10, where it says that it will offer lethal and non-lethal aid to the Ukraine, as well as services. Services can mean boots on the ground. So it pretty much declares war on Russia. Now, here's the thing that kills me about the United States, and I'm not picking on the American people, because it's not the American people that want this. It's it's another banker war is what it is. Is they sit there and everything in Resolutions 758, which I made a video on it and I read it out, so you know what's in there. Pretty much everything they accuse Russia of doing, they're doing themselves. It's like it's okay when they do it, but not when anybody else does it. If anybody else does that, they're a dictator. But if and regime change is considered an act of terrorism and war if somebody else does it. So why is it okay when they do it? And this is a question that comes up about foreign policy quite often. Now, in kind of looking at what Russia has just recently done, they have basically redid their military doctrine. And again, if anybody has any doubt that we're not in a new Cold War, I don't know what to tell you, but basically Russia has now come out and said pretty. Oh, you couldn't make it again. They're telling us exactly their intentions. And the thing is too many people, oh no, the Russians are just bluffing. They'll never do it. I don't think the Russians really bluff that. They bluff for certain things, but certain things I don't think they're bluffing. And what they said is they're now going to kind of change their doctrine, where you have to understand the Russian military, as big as it is an offensive military, or a defensive military, not an offensive military. That could change, because what they come out and say is the number one threat to Russia is basically NATO. That's what they're saying, and they're right. It truly is the NATO expansion. Right up to its borders, all the ships in the Black Sea. The sanctions. So they know that the number one threat to them is NATO. That said, that means anybody who's a part of NATO is a threat to them. So in their new doctrine, what they're also talking about is how they may respond, which could include nuclear missiles. It can include strategic, tactical missiles. It can, all kinds of stuff. But it also removes that kind of, and the Chinese did this in 2012, where they're revisiting that the no first strike policy. This is, the most terrifying. If the Russians do this, okay, the Chinese have already done it, meaning that if they feel threatened enough, they're going to start acting like the United States, doing preemptive strikes on people. And the only people that are ever going to preemptive strike is, North America. Now, some people are out there saying, yeah, this is just a big show. Putin's is controlled by the same guy. Obama's controlled by the same people. And you have to understand that there is probably some truth to that, but I don't think there's I think there's a lot of different factions in here. It's not one group of people. The New World Order isn't one group of people. The New World Order is what I just called corrupt elites. So you have your populist faction, you have your communist faction, you have your eugenicist faction, you have your Israeli faction, Zionism and all that. You also have your banking cartel, which are not all Zionists. Some of them are just corrupt bankers. You have the Anglo-American thing. You have the Eurasian Pacific group. You have the Queen. You have there's a whole bunch of different factions here. And then, of course, you just have outright regular day-to-day criminals. People who want to control things, right? They're all control freaks. They're nuts. They're completely clinically insane. Anybody that's going to mess with a nuclear power, and for no reason whatsoever, really, that makes any sense other than depopulation. That's the only reason why they'd be doing this, because even if they're doing it from a kind of command and conquer and steal everybody's resources kind of mentality, which is possible, even at that, it's counterproductive to get into a war trying to steal somebody else's resources. You're going to have to go about it a different way. You're not going to be able to take the resources that way. Other things that have happened is that the sanctions on Russia. Oh, be quiet, you dog. They're not working the way they said. The Russian ruble, yeah, it's taken a big dive, but it's also recovering. And the Chinese have kind of jumped to the aid of the Russians, saying, okay, well, we'll do a currency swap between, they'll basically help out the Russians, currency right now with, basically with the yuan renminbi, they'll buy some rubles and they'll swap them out, that type of thing, and just to get the Russian economy kind of back onto where it was. Putin also, is saying things like, because there is uprisings in Russia. There's always uprisings in Russia, and China is something like 150 to 175,000 riots a year that they have, and protests. Thing is these countries, they don't let them get out of control. Now, what's going on in Hong Kong, I think it's fizzling out. But every one of these protests, okay, works out the same way. What it is this George Soros-funded group. George Soros admits this all the time. He always says, it's, we funded this and we funded that. The guy doesn't, he's just simply not a good person. What the heck? Okay. He's just a horrible, horrible, horrible human being. The thing about it is that even with that said, it was George Soros that was out there not too long saying that, Asia must be the new superpower. So, these guys they're switching the system. They're doing, the pivot to Asia and stuff like that. And the reason why they're going after Russia, it's like I've always said, and it just makes so much sense to me, is Russia has, yes, China has the biggest military in the world numbers-wise, but when we're talking technology, the biggest threat is Russia. Russia has they're pretty much, with exception of a few areas, they're basically, Russia's military is designed to fight NATO. It's always been designed to pretty much fight NATO after World War II, as soon as NATO came along. What they've done, okay, is they pretty much, in a lot of areas outnumber NATO, like in tanks and stuff like that. Aircraft, they're maybe slightly outnumber NATO in some areas. In manpower, they're almost, you're looking about, if you add up reservists and everything, you're looking at about 3 million per side if everybody in NATO kicks in. Thing is I think what Russia's strategy is to basically destroy NATO by getting people to question the sanity of the Americans, which is a good idea. NATO, it just emboldens the British and the American governments to do the most insane things. And unfortunately, us here in Canada, we're pretty much adopting U.S. foreign policy, which Canada cannot pay that bill. It's not so much that we're going to run ourselves into too much debt. We probably will in the long run, but that's not the big. It's the blowback that comes with it. The amount of countries you destabilize. I mean, people are going to, they're going to remember names of the countries that do this, and we're just not equipped or set up for that at all. And that's, we should be more of a neutral country. I mean, if we want to send food aid and medical and stuff like that, even disaster relief, I'm not so much against that, but even that needs to be kept into check too, because, I mean, trying to save everybody else, sometimes often, and governments do this all the time, is they say, screw the indigenous people, we're going to send money out of the country and send it over here and send it over there. But that's globalism, you know what I mean? That's how globalism works, and that's the globalist mentality. They don't care about the people that are in their country, they care about stealing the resources over there or undercutting the labor here. That's why you have that. So most people around the world are, all these austerity protests and stuff, that's protesting globalism. That's what's happening. Now, the elites know that the jig's going to be up at some point. The jig's going to be up at some point. They're not going to be able to pull this off. Hence why they're buying bankers, something like 3,800 bankers survival kits. Like when a government, why would they be buying survival kits for bankers? What do they know? And this all happened in 2014, right? So when we're looking at that, we also have Russia out there. They're saying, look, dropping the world's oil prices too low, chaos is rising, it destabilizes the world. And when they say destabilize, you have to understand, Russia doesn't care about other countries. They don't. They never did, they never will. When they say it's destabilizing the world, what they're saying is you're pissing us off. That's what they're saying. Now, can Russia take NATO? No, and this is what makes everything so dangerous, because the technological advantages are to NATO and the NATO nations. Thing is Russia knows this. Russia is terrified right now. And by Russia, I mean the Russian leaders. Now, the patriots out there, it's the same way you get with any patriot in any country. You know, their country is completely ironclad, and nothing can ever hurt them and stuff like that. No, we all lose in this big war. We lose big time. Because you have to understand, where World War III picks up is where World War II left off, and there's going to be big firecrackers. Because Russia cannot take NATO in a conventional war over the long period of time. I mean, you never know. It depends. Strategy is everything. Either goes to extreme stalemate, but no matter what, and Europeans are out there protesting, saying, hey, we don't want a war in Europe. Million-man mass march. I was really happy to hear the guy say, we don't want a war in Europe. Because they know that's where it's going to lead. They know all of Eastern Europe is pretty much going to burn. Why? Because that's going to be the battleground. That's going to be battleground one. But if the Russians adopt their new policy of preemptive strike, they could be, if they think the Americans are going to be doing something, we are back in a worse scenario than the previous Cold War, because the Americans are going after the Russians, and they know it. During the Cold War, they went after the Russians. But the men that fought back then, and you might as well say fought, even though it was a Cold War, it was still being fought. They, even on both sides, they were at least semi-rational. Yes, it was a very, insane thing that was going on, but they were at least semi-rational. They weren't completely narcissistically absorbed in their own power. You know what I mean? Many were, like, Stalin and what you call them, right after Stalin there, Khrushchev, and yeah, these guys were narcissistic, don't get me wrong. I mean, they're definitely narcissistic. But they're not completely over the cuckoo's nest nuts. Meaning they knew where the line was drawn, and that would be it. Anybody crosses the line, we know it's for real. And many nuclear disasters were avoided at the very last second. There's so many times. Like every year we find out about a new declassified time that we nearly nuked each other on accident. So those men were playing semi-rational. We don't have that kind of rationality anymore. We're going to win at all costs, and it's kind of like the Emperor Nero meets Moby Dick. Got to get that great white whale. Let's we'll fund everybody to destroy all our enemies until the only enemy left to destroy is us. You know what I mean? It's like, and that's the way. It's exactly like Moby Dick. These people can't see their own demise and destruction. They can't see it, and they definitely don't care about you or me. That's these elites. Like, again, when you think about what money really is, and a lot of people, and somebody said this really well on Max Kaiser. Remember, all the money in your pocket is the banker's money. They printed it. They want it back. They want to control it. But what is money? Money is just medium of exchange in an honest world. But in a not so honest world, the world we live in, it is a method of slavery. Because if you can control the money, it's the golden rule. He who has the gold rules. So if you can control the money, you can control what they are allowed to spend it on or not allowed to spend it on, using sanctions, whatever. But most importantly, if you can make everything that's perishable in your money, you can control everybody. It doesn't matter what country. There is no countries once you have complete currency control. That's why gold and silver are so dangerous to the globalists, is because the thing that happened in Russia, with the Russian ruble taking a massive dive of almost lost 60% of its value. Well, the gold and silver, or gold pretty much that they put away, pretty much helped them to get back on track. So, is the Russian economy still suffering? Yeah, the people will suffer. The people always suffer. Because again, this is never about the people. It's about, it's about globalism. It's about these elites. We're just in the way of their plans, so to speak. So Russia, if they're just putting on a show and going along with the whole, pretend to be, that the world's about to burn, we're, just pretending, well, then we're actually going to be okay in the end, because all we're going to see is a paradigm shift. So we'll be spending the yuan, renminbi, or whatever the new, I forget the name of the new IMF currency that they're talking about. And remember, the IMF is the Rothschild banking system. It's the Federal Reserve is not federal. It's actual Rothschild banking system. It's one banking system. Now to say, well, yeah, these are just a bunch of bankers that got rich by accident, not by accident, but by well planning and hard work. No, they got rich by stealing everybody else's wealth. That's, and the idea that this family owns almost, like $7 quadrillion worth of, 70 quadrillion, whatever, an infathomable amount of money their wealth is. They own so much, and it's not just them. There's, I guess, the Wallensteins, and the house. There's the House of Rothschild, the House of Windsor, all these, these elites. These guys are just a part of the system too. You also have to factor in things like the Ming Dynasty. Yeah, it's still around. These things don't go away. Might call it something else now. The Yakuzas. The mafia, the regular mafia, the Russian mafia, which one? So it's like these guys, there's different grade levels of them, but they're all pretty much have the same, same kind of mentality. And with Russia changing, I don't think, I'd like to hope that, because it's the lesser of the evils, at least you can actually, you're going to live through the ordeal, that this whole thing is staged. But I don't think it is. Just because I think it is a true legitimate power struggle between two superpowers, or technically three superpowers. In the end, Russia and China will fight, but that might be years down the road, if there's anybody left to fight. There's also been the threat, came from Guccifer. There's also Hollande, had an emergency stopover in Moscow. I think it was Moscow, or somewhere in Russia, to talk to Vladimir Putin this week. And if the rumor is correct, he's basically told Putin, they didn't even go to anywhere nice. They met in the airport, from what I heard. Again, take this one with a grain of salt, because it could be just BS. But anyway, Hollande meets with Putin, says, hey, there's going to be a false flag in Chicago, basically a nuke go off in Chicago, and they're going to blame it on you, and they know how the Russians are going to respond. So he says, when they blame it on you, France has nothing to do with it. So that means France is not going to keep up to Article 5 on NATO. The other thing is, that's if that's true. Again, this could be, all kinds of wild stories come out. But it is a fact that Hollande did stop to talk to Putin over the past week or so. So with that, plus what happened with the Mistral, aircraft carrier, helicopter carrier that France was supposed to sell to Russia. They basically want their, at a time when, the French economy is just in shambles, like most of the European economies, and everybody's going to be getting the same dose of that in 2015 anyway. If it's going to go from bad to worse for a lot of people, even here in North America, because of, again, there is no recovery. It's a sham. They don't count discouraged workers. They at least count the discouraged workers here in Canada. They add in more foreign manufacturing into the job numbers in the United States. So if you factor in those things, people understand what you're seeing. Okay, is societal decay going on in the United States, big time. I mean, the Christmas sale numbers, they're not going to be as, they'll find maybe one or two things that sell really well and say, oh look, it was the best year ever, but it's not. People don't have money. There was a boost in the economy in the States in the last quarter, and that was because Obamacare was due. So when people are spending money on that, not big screen TVs and cars and whatever, the economy is going to take a hit. That's why I tell people, put food away. And again, the mainstream media, it's not so much that they just lie to you; it's they lie by omission. They're not talking about. Putin changes the status of. Their military doctrine to make NATO their number one threat, and they're right. It is. It is. That's somehow not news. You're going to tell me that how's that not news? How is that not news? Oh well, we don't want to fearmonger and scare people. Keeping people informed, even if it is a scary subject, is not a bad thing. Other things. Let's look at the recent. North Korea went and hacked Sony. Well, it's turning out, Steve Brzezinski is saying, no, this is between North Korea and Japan, there is a lot of motive between the two of them, and they hate each other. North Korea's internet, pretty much government-sanctioned internet, has been hammered all week. Where it's coming from, it looks like more of that. Now, there was The CIA says no, it's North Korea because it has their signature all over it and stuff like that. But there's no motive for North Korea to do this, And we also saw this with the innocence of Muslims, how the CIA, the Obama administration, they blame this video that had nothing to do with Benghazi as a cover-up. So again, lie after lie after lie on a government that allows the CIA to basically, they justify the CIA torturing people. That also has now made it impossible to impeach, or not impeach, but to prosecute for crimes against humanity. George Bush, any of the Bush family, Tony Blair, and all. What you call him? Colin Powell. What's the other guy? Anyway, all the Iraqi invasion stuff. This is a government that clearly takes care of its own. So, and lies and lies and lies. And then, of course, there's, I think it's called Norse is the. They're basically a cyber warfare kind of, they track hacking and stuff like that. And they're saying no, that from what they figured out, they did an independent kind of study. They said no, it's not North Korea attacking Sony. And remember, Sony is a Japanese company. Okay, so that could be over there. It could be more to do with over there. But no good crisis goes to waste, right? And what they're saying is it was a lady named Irene or something like that. Or a username of Irene, that basically is a disgruntled employee of Sony and did all this from the inside, and then just pinged it off of North Korea to blame North Korea. So I believe that to be much more realistic. But yet, do you hear a peep of it on the on the media? No, the narrative will be, one thing and one thing only. North Korea did this, and then North Korea turns into Russia and China. And I'm not saying North Korea, Russia, and China don't do cyber attacks, but 2015 is probably going to be the cyber attack year. And then right after that, I think it just goes into no more cyber attacks. We're living in some really scary times right now. And again, I don't do this to fearmonger. It's more to just keep people, kind of alert that when you see all the patriotism, okay, yeah, we have to go after Russia and we have to go after China and we have to go kill these people. It's no different than what they did in Vietnam, no different than what they did in World War I, World War II. And despite how you feel about the people that fight in these wars, you have to understand it's not about them. It's about, well, it is about them to a good degree because they have to fight it, but it's about the corruption. It's about how these elites get us into these things in the first place. The other thing to keep in mind too is that with what's going on with the militarization of the police and the race war that's basically being propagated. I listened to about 20 minutes of Louis Farrakhan talk about how pretty much, the guy's fanning the flames like you wouldn't believe, basically calling for a race war. I mean, this guy hates his own people. He really does. Because, if he had any love for his people whatsoever, the last thing he would be doing is telling 13% of the population to really piss off, a much higher majority, better armed part of the population. There's no critical thought in those people. Maybe they're legit, maybe they're not, but I don't think they are. And that's why you're starting to see more police officer attacks. That's part of the societal decay. They need that. Why? Because they need something to blame the economic collapse on. If they can get a civil war going and in state martial law, then it doesn't really matter if you know the truth or not. But when you follow everybody, again, I'd love to be able to say everything I talk about is BS. And maybe some of it is, but most of it isn't. Even if 1% of the stuff I talk about is correct, it's a terrifying 1%, right? So when we look at it like that, we know that what they want in the United States is basically the United States to look like Eastern Ukraine right now. Why? Because and like I say, come spring, the U.S. is going to burn in riots. But that's part of societal decay. But then they can blame everything on the rioters and say, hey, we had to have martial law and we can't pay you anymore because this is down, that's down. Oh, there's cyber attacks, so we can't pay you anymore. You get the idea. The economy is tanked. It's collapsed. And the idea is there is no accountability in the systems. There are no brave law enforcement military out there that are going to arrest these criminals. They are going to let, maybe they're doing it out of the fear of their own jobs, ridicule. Maybe they just can't find the smoking gun, which I don't know how they can't because these people pretty much admit everything they do in open public. But, so it's going to go to the deep end. The thing is for my audience, what I hope for people is to just kind of sidestep it. Don't get sucked up into it because it's a lose-lose situation no matter how you plan it out. And because of that, it's like, okay, well, you don't want to be caught in between a civil war. You don't want to definitely don't want to be caught between, NATO and the Russians. You definitely don't want to be caught, without any food or other supplies during an economic collapse. Which, I mean, everything is so clear that the stock market is not the economy. Just look around your own area. How many stores are closing? How many people are losing their jobs? How many people are getting their hours cut? That's all you have to look at. The times are hard, and they're going to get worse. We still have it pretty good here in North America in comparison to other countries, but it's getting worse. The other thing is Hungary looks like it's going to put its alliance with Russia. I don't know if that's 100% going to go through, but I think right now, Putin's making deals with certain countries, saying, look, there's going to be a regional war there. You could be with us or you could be in our way. That's pretty much what he's doing. And it looks like Hungary is going to probably go towards Russia. I don't know what Finland's going to do. The people in Europe, again, I'm getting people, and if you're a watcher in one of these countries, let me know what's going on. Is there a lot of military activity that you're witnessing? People in the UK are telling me about, pretty much daily jet scrambles. And again, to say that we're not in a new Cold War, they just will not acknowledge it. But some mainstream media is. And I'm not talking even though I consider Russia today kind of mainstream media, I'm not talking about them. Even Ukraine today, which is anti-Russian as possible, they're admitting it. Mind you, they're living it. They're living, the shooting part of the war right now. It just, I don't think it's going to be contained to the Ukraine. I think it will make its way into France. I think it will make its way into Turkey. I think it will make its way, right up into Poland. It will probably make it right to the border of Sweden and probably Norway. Again, I don't know what, they're going to do in Finland. Again, are they going to be in the way? Because not choosing a side is just putting you in the way. If you choose a side, well then, whatever's going to be, Ukraine is going to be utterly and completely destroyed at some point. And you can thank the U.S. government for the coup to do this. Because again, if they can't have it, nobody can. If the Russians can't have it, nobody can. That's what guarantees that they will be destroyed. What the Ukrainians should have done is they should have went with the right sector guys right away and just ousted everybody. Get rid of all the IMF bankers that are running the show. Again, look, Joe Biden's son comes in to run the gas, the resources. Again, the Ukrainians didn't even get their own country back. All they got was a puppet that's subservient to the Rothschild banking system. That's all they got. And you have the Ukrainian military out there. Sure, they're killing rebels on the other side of the country, but they're also shelling their own people that are pro-Ukraine. They just have to be geographically in the wrong place. And they're just shelling their own people. It's genocide. It's insane. So to have any faith in the Poroshenko is you're better off to have faith in the Easter Bunny. You know what I'm saying? It's a bad situation. Next to that, again, Russia responding to resolution 758 is basically declaring war on the United States. Declaring war on NATO, meaning and I think a lot of European countries are starting to, I think France is probably kind of looking at this saying, oh, geez, in World War II, this didn't work out very well for us when we, chose the wrong side. So I'm thinking France is probably thinking, if we could just avoid this by going neutral, we'll let Brussels decide what they want to do, but, we're going to be neutral. We're going to pull, the Swiss were the smart ones in World War II, really, World War II would have just been probably most likely between Germany and Russia to a point. The whole thing too is that you have to understand that the British allowed Hitler to get a lot further. Some even say Hitler might have been a British agent just to get a war going. I don't know if that's true or not. Like anything, that one might be on the side of conspiracy. But what we do know is if we compare Russia to, say, Japan just before World War II with the Americans, they're pretty much, the similarities are terrifying. You have sanctions. Now, again, the Russians knew this was coming, so they're not being duped into it. What I think they were trying to do in the Ukraine was to get a Russian response, to get the Russia to roll its tanks into the Ukraine, but they didn't bite. and again, with what you see in Syria, again, this is more of a problem, where they're trying, destabilize Russia than they are Syria. But it's also because they want to get into Iran, so that once they get into Iran, then they can basically put missile systems on China. The United States is also saying that they, by the year 2020, 2/3 of the U.S. naval fleet will be surrounding China. Again, what has China done other than economically taking over the world without firing a shot? Well, that's their sin. That's what they did wrong. By taking care of their own, they basically have been competition. You see what I mean? So that's the whole thing about these globalists. They don't like competition. They're not about fair people being fair. And this is why they need to be put in jail. These people are utterly psychopath. Look, Hitler passed a hell of a lot of laws that were unjust. Okay, and people around the world are looking at these globalists putting in like banker bailouts, banker bail-ins. Stealing is stealing is stealing. It doesn't matter if you make it legal or not. So the problem you have, the people you really have to reach is the people that will enforce this. It's funny how easy they can crack down on rioters and stuff, but yet they let the banking cartels walk free. Knowing, again, you have Jamie Dimon calling members of Congress saying, hey, look, when you pass the next budget, put this in it. And now you have banker, something like $2 trillion worth of basically Wall Street debt that the American taxpayer will have to pay in the next collapse. So why would they do this, at a time when they're buying, again, the past 3 months has been pretty crazy. And I still stick to my stance that within the next 2 months, a nuclear war is highly, highly, highly possible. If Russia knew it could superiorly take NATO, even taking big losses without going nuclear, then it would probably do it. But I don't, even with the Russian numbers that you have, which pretty much is designed to take on NATO. So the best strategy, Russia, they know it's a lose-lose situation if they get into a shooting war. But they know at some point that shooting war is going to be unavoidable. Putin hasn't played the strong man or the crazy man like North Korea yet. That's coming. When you start to see nuclear weapons being redetonated, okay, they've already rearmed 400 nuclear warheads, and they're still working on more. So they have all kinds of missile systems, land-based missile systems that have broken agreements. And people say, look, they broke this agreement, but they broke those agreements. When we look at who kicked the can first, it goes to NATO expansion. Okay, that's what Russia is responding to. NATO backs off, the Russians might back down. Ukraine is lost. Sorry about the people in Ukraine. Are we willing to go to die for them? When they would probably, let's go back before the coup, okay, the U.S. coup. In 2010, they were talking about a conversation Vladimir Putin and the Polish Prime Minister had in 2009, which was secretly recorded, where, Putin was saying, hey, how about you guys get one half of the Ukraine, we'll take the other half of the Ukraine, divide it up, whatever. And that's about as much as we know about that conversation. It doesn't mean they were going to destroy the Ukraine. I don't think that was ever the intentions. Why? The Ukraine produces food for the Russians, okay, or did. They produced a lot of munitions, including nuclear weapons for the Russians. They were basically the labor sector, for the Russians. So, and plus you have the Black Sea Fleet in the Crimea. And, basically the strategy of the Ukraine, was basically the area that kind of kept NATO back, off of Russia's border. The Trident missiles on the U.S. Ohio-class submarines have 3 main destinations on every submarine. Out of all 14 submarines, there are 2 missiles on every submarine and each missile carries up to like 24 missiles with 1 to 3 warheads, I think, on average. And 2 missiles on each submarine had 3 priority targets: Moscow, Warsaw, Kiev. I bet you they haven't even changed that yet. Kiev is not considered a friend of the United States. They're just a puppet, that proxy war. And again, people, once they, again, the idea is they wanted the people to fight each other to destroy the Ukraine. Again, it's about resources. It's about control. It's also about isolation. It's also about putting missile systems on Russian borders. And the Russians said, look, if you put those missile systems in, we reserve the right to preemptive strike those things. That would lead to a hot war very, very quickly. The next thing is we have nuclear missiles, Topol-Ms, in the Crimea. They've been there since March. Now with what's going on in Cuba, you have to understand, Obama, okay, just think about this logically. Obama comes out and says, oh, well, out of nowhere, we're going to lift sanctions against Cuba because after 50 years, sanctions don't seem to work. But on the same day, he's putting sanctions against Russia. So what's that all really about? Well, I'll tell you what that's really about. Remember, during this year of 2014, we're almost into 2015, that the Russians have said, we are now going to make patrolling the Gulf of Mexico a regular thing. They've paid off 90+% of Cuba's debt to Russia. Okay, that's a big thing. They are going to be setting up new military bases in Cuba. This is admitted by the Russians. This is why the United States is trying to get into Cuba. It's going to backfire for the United States. So when we start to see Topolems arrive in Venezuela, Cuba, stuff like that, and that I think will be just before the crazy Wild Man Act will happen. After that, I think there's no more warnings that Russia can give us to say, look, back down, you've gone too far. But the U.S. government will push it to that because, again, even the generals, they're psychotic. They cannot. They're Moby Dick. They have to get the great white whale. They can't see that pushing this. They'd rather be right than and have everybody die in a nuclear holocaust than to say, okay, well, maybe we should rethink this and back this down. Because we don't want to look weak now. Pride's a killer. Pride's a killer. That's all I got to say. The other thing, too, is right after you see nuclear weapons going into South America, which will happen, period, because of the new, you have the, the Panama Canal, but the Chinese have already started to break ground on the, not Bolivia, the Guatemalan Canal. I think it's Guatemala. Anyway, it's a bigger canal. It's there's going to be some, that thing's going to be built by 2020 or 20, somewhere, but they're starting it now. And this is basically going to bypass the Rothschild-owned Panama Canal. Again, it's banking systems that are fighting. So while all this craziness is going on, what nobody's saying is, why don't we just get rid of the bankers? Why don't we just put them in jail? But we don't have any brave law enforcement military to do this, and prosecutors. Again, people can grasp the idea of a gangbanger or a petty thug or an axe murderer or a serial killer or a mob crime boss, even corrupt politician or corrupt police. They can grasp that idea, but they can't grasp the idea of genocidal, narcissistic maniacs destroying the planet through ego, for a piece of paper to use as an enslavement tool to control resources. Like, I get it, and I'm not that smart. How come I get it and they don't? Well, they do get it. It's just, again, they're loyalists, and I've covered videos on loyalists. And I've listened to some of the military generals. Again, as soon as you say, "Hey, go destroy Russia," they don't realize how many people are going to get killed in this process. Iraq and Afghanistan, okay. These are, okay, yeah, well, Saddam had T-72s. Yeah, but Saddam, he was a nothing army. It was a big army, sure, but they weren't trained. The Republican Guard, a handful of these guys were elite soldiers. The rest of them are just, putting on uniforms, you know what I mean? The older T-72s and stuff like that, and T-63s that the Russians will still be using, mostly T-72s. Sure, they're older, and their reactive armor is good, but the thing is that it's not so much the tank, it's the crew. The Russian crews are well trained, for the most part. Not all of them, but for the most part, they're well trained enough. If they did decide to come across the border in a lightning kind of blitzkrieg type war, again, the protocol is basically Su-27s are basically air superiority machines, bringing in escorts for, say, the Su-24s. So you have 1,500 of those that will be taking out NATO installations. Yeah, they'll take heavy losses, but they can afford to take the losses. That's the thing about the Russians, is they can afford to take the losses because they have, they have enough numbers. And then right after them comes in the frogfoots to clean up anything else that they might encounter. Even if they lose 10-1, they're still going to, destroy 90% of NATO within the first couple of weeks. That said, because you have to understand, one of the first things that the Russians are going to go after is satellites. If they can't shoot them down, they'll blind them. And if you don't know where they are, analog equipment works fine when you don't know where it is. Artillery guns are still one of the best, military equipment that you can get. Why? Because you don't, by the time you hear the thing coming in at you, it's too late. So again, I don't think in the long run Russia can take NATO, but that's the other problem, is because they can't take NATO. they'll take them to heavy losses, and either it ends up as a stalemate, and then you have basically East continent, West continent. The Russians control this, and everybody will be slaughtered in the and I get Europeans are understanding this. If the Russians were to win this war, there will be no more Europe. That'll be the end of Europe. There will be no more Queen. There will be no more Rothschild banking systems. There will be no more of that. That'll be gone. And anybody that's not Russian speaking, basically they'll be the new Fourth Reich, or the Fifth Reich. We'll call them the Fifth Reich, because they're fighting the Fourth Reich now. You know what I mean? That's what Germany, in that banking system is really the Fourth Reich. It's kind of, that's what it is. So when we're looking at it like that, a lot of Europeans are saying, whoa, before we kind of just follow blindly on Article 5, how about we try to de-escalate war? But yet, again, when you look at the sanctions going on to Russia and stuff like that, they're backfiring. Because Russia's going around the U.S. dollar. They're going to take a rough patch for a little while. You have almost half the world the United States has isolated itself. I think when you start, if you don't start to see members of NATO just kind of backing off or getting out, because again, NATO Article 5, an attack against one is an attack against all. This is why they haven't signed Ukraine into NATO yet. It's not because they don't want them there. They understand that the second they do, Article 5 kicks into place, and there won't be time to prepare for a war. It'll just be, we're at war, bang, like shooting war, like that. It goes right to shooting war. There'll be no, because of the obligation, right? And that's already been kind of put into play under Resolution 758. Now the Russians have responded to that. So basically, you now have the Russians have declared war on NATO, which is a global war because of all the nations involved, and you have the United States that has, basically kicked the can first again, declaring war on Russia. Is it an official declaration of war? Yes, it is, if you understand the lawyer speak in it. And this is the problem. So why would these two nations, do this unless they were going to go to war? And every time you'll see the United States will do something, the Russians will respond to it. It's called escalation. So you have some mainstream media out there talking about new Cold Wars. You even finally got Mikhail Gorbachev to finally admit, said, yeah, we're in a new Cold War. They're trying to create this crazy New World Order thing, you know what I mean? Like it's lunacy, and be quiet, you. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's the elites again. They're nuts. They're like Moby. Again, it's Moby Dick. They have to get that great white whale. So, and in that process, could be a really, really bad thing for us. So we'll have to wait to see what happens in January, February. I think because the economy is going to go so south in the January, February months for the United States, I think things are going to be almost impossible to cover up. That's why they're going to have to get more police officer shootings and stuff like that. That was a byproduct. I mean, those I don't think are false flags. A lot of things aren't false flags. It's engineered, but it's not. So in that sense, okay. So you militarize the police, and then you notice that the police start shooting everybody. 2 seconds after they get out of their patrol cars. Okay, yeah, that's technically a false flag because these guys wouldn't be doing that if they weren't trained to respond like military soldiers instead of peace officers, which we don't use the term peace officer, it's law enforcement. The ideology, these guys are basically responding how they were trained. So, what you're going to see in the States is more of that. But what they're not talking about is how many white people get shot that are unarmed, as well. Not a single one of them makes it onto the mainstream media. And lots have. Lots have. So the question is really, it's not so much, like to keep pushing. A white police officer shoots an unarmed black kid or whatever. And that's all they push. They push the race baiting of it. Why? Because they want to rile up the blacks. They want a race war. Why? Because then they can blame it, use that to blame the economy. They can use that for an excuse for martial law. They can use it for an excuse for this, that, and the other thing. Look, Sony gets hacked, okay? Again, what damage did the Sony hack do to anybody? It didn't really do anything. But look at all the bills that the CISPA and SOPA and stuff like that they want to pass, basically to take away as much internet freedom as possible. I mean, at some point I will not be allowed to make videos like this without going to jail for 50 years. So when we're at that, how are we different from North Korea or China or whatever? You know what I mean? Like, how are we different when you have a government that is basically, they're the problem, they're too corrupt. And people around the world are starting to, that's what a lot of these protests are about. But many of them, again, there can never, under subversion programs, there can never be legitimate protest. So the idea, is on the mainstream media, is to give praise to the angry black youth that are going out and blowing things up and burning things and stuff like that, but not to even talk about the police state, you know. So that's exactly what's going on, and because of that, you know, again, they're not talking. You know, they never focus on the people that say, hey, you know, like, how about we, you know, why are we have such militarization of the police? That conversation barely touched. You know, they'll talk about it enough on the mainstream media to say they talked about it, but they don't address it. You know, because it's only about systemic racism, but it's not. It has, you know, this is a byproduct of military training on your law enforcement. So why would they do that? Again, you know, why does the DHS do a lot of things? For example, Joe Scalzo said something interesting about the 7 billion rounds that the DHS bought. And I kind of hope he's right on it in a way. He says they did that, they put that out there as a probe just to see what the comments. Again, you have to understand, the best surveillance system on the planet is Facebook and YouTube. Why? Because people openly admit everything. So that's how they find out who their, you know, their enemies are. And some of these things the DHS might be putting out there just to see who they're going to, you know, who's going to go on the blue, green, and red list type of thing, you know. And those lists do exist, you know. So, I mean, the communists used something like that years ago. We're not really seeing, you have to understand, the people that, the elites that are in their, you know, 60s and 70s, some in their 80s, these are all the people that basically grew up with, you know, in the era of hardcore communism, you know, even though it was in other countries. But they infiltrated here, you know, and you saw it during the, you know, sexual revolution, the what you call it, cultural revolution, all that stuff. And most of these leaders were basically, if you look at the Agenda 21 stuff, these are the people that bred that stuff. And if you look at what is Agenda 21, other than, you know, get Karl Marx's 10 Pillars of Communism, put them side by side. The only thing is it just added, you know, an environmental green communism. You just add that spin to it. And that's what it is. You know, so people are starting to see this and they don't like it, so they're protesting it. Mass immigration is another part. Yeah, I'll cover this in a separate video, but, you know, like 15,000 Germans basically just, you know, are protesting. At first it was a neo-Nazi, they said it was a neo-Nazi hooligan rally. And that's the way they're going to spin it because, oh, they're ultra-right fascists. Well, these are people that just want their country back. And you're seeing this all throughout Europe, and that's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And again, no, these are people that don't want to be, they don't want cultural displacement. You know, they're not populists. They don't want, you know, and you have to understand, here in Canada, they're doing it here too, bringing in 250,000 people and upping it to 285,000 people probably by the end of this year. It's insane. We can't sustain that. And you can't sustain that without getting a culture clash, what you're seeing in many European countries right now. And it's not because people are racist and stuff that they're doing that. It's just they don't want this globalism, you know, and they don't want to all become as poor as these nations where these people are coming from. Because when they come here, they're coming in at such a rate that you just can't, it overwhelms the system. It's less medical care for everybody, it's less resources for everybody. Everything gets, you know, artificially inflated. Prices of, you know, everything goes up because everything becomes more rare because there's so much competition. And of course, employment, you know, it undercuts the employment. So you can't have mass immigration if it's not sustainable. And no country can sustain that right now. And that's what you're seeing protests on. But while they're protesting that, they're also, again, protesting, okay, you know, and it's nice to see some of the younger, just to kind of finish up, and I think you're going to see this in 2015, like a massive revolt, where you have to understand, when people go out and protest, you have your protesters that are protesting something legitimate, okay? And then you have your people out there with different agendas. And you may have out there people saying, hey, you know, while we're out protesting together, you know about this, 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 and this. And that's better than any internet ever, because why? It's human interaction. You can't monitor it. You can't, you know what I mean? So the thing is people are, you know, waking up at an alarming rate that the elites at some point are becoming so transparently corrupt that there's absolutely anybody that's going to stand in the way of their prosecution is going to be, they're going to be sunken. You know, the Titanic has already hit the iceberg on that one. These elites, you know, the Committee of 300, they're gone. Rothschilds, they're gone. Their wealth is going to be seized at some point. They know this. That's why they're so nuts. And they'll fight tooth and nail and kill as many people in the process to try to save it, but it won't work. It's not going to work. Why? Because communism always fails in the end, or their variation of it. Thing is that's why they need this war to get going. When all else fails, you go to war. So I guess I'm going on a little bit long now, but 2015 I think is going to be a very, very, go back to 2010, and when I made my first started making my first World War III updates was about that. I said there's nothing we've been doing since 2010 that has led us away from war. It's 2010 was a scary year with the NDAA and the NDRP, which was a major preparation for war. Any American out there should go and read the NDRP and understand what that really entails. The draft has already been enacted. The confiscation for the war effort is already legal. It's just the order has to be given. All these bills are ready to. They're signed. They're ready to go. Basically, what you call it, your labor to the state without compensation, all that stuff there. NDAA, which was more of a sideshow, but bad enough. And then, of course, all these other, things that they were signing, ready to go. And then, of course, we look from 2013 to 2014, the escalation. And this year has been a record year for military, basically military drills and stuff like that. Unbelievable. Again, the nuclear weapons being, $1 trillion going into the U.S. Nuclear weapons upgrade program. The Russians, readying, having over 400 ready nuclear war weapons and pulling out new stuff. And I mean, the escalation is there. The Cold War is well on. When does it go hot? Who knows? Nobody knows that date and time. I think it's just going to happen more by accident than anything. And this is why the bankers are doing it. Again, it's a Moby Dick scenario. These people are crazy. They're insane. They must be put away. I have a feeling we're probably going to see, as we see more of these Hydra kind of gremlin type people coming out, we're also going to see a lot more of what I call the hellhounds or spooks with a conscience. People that basically work within the system that basically no longer will just follow orders. And these people are going to start either knocking off the elites, which we've already seen that with the bankers, the amount of banker suicides this year. I think 2015 is just going to be a hyper extension of all that, plus all the border incursions from Russia. It's just going to ramp up 10 times fold to fever pitch until people remove the elites. If not, we go to war, possibly within the next 2 months, just at the rate things are going at. Again, if you follow it, it doesn't sound that far-fetched. A lot of people say, no, they'll never do it because whatever. But again, we shouldn't even be this far in the conversation, should we? You know what I mean? So I'll leave it at that. So if you like this kind of stuff, there'll be a link down below to make donations for the channel, to help out the channel. And thank you very much to everybody who has. Be true to yourself. Be true to others. Always, always do the right thing. Have a great day. Oh, and rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. And, yeah. So anyway, if I don't make another video before next year, which I probably will, have a Happy New Year and a late Merry Christmas to everybody that I didn't get a chance to. And there we go. G'day, hi, and welcome. World War III update. But I'm going to multitask while I'm doing this. Okay, so, hope everybody had a great Christmas and, Happy New Year for everybody. Happy New Year. Hopefully it'll be Happy New Year for everybody and you don't get nuked. That kind of thing. So you think, okay, so Christmas holidays, politicians went home, nobody's fighting, it's time of peace and love and all that stuff, and the baby Jesus and all that stuff, and things are good in the world, eh? No. There's the Russians have responded to Resolution 758, the Ukrainian Freedom Act or whatever it is, which is basically a declaration of war, especially resolution, part of the resolution number 10. Where it says that it will offer lethal and non-lethal aid to the Ukraine, as well as services. Services can mean boots on the ground. So it pretty much declares war on Russia. Now, here's the thing that kills me about the United States, and I'm not picking on the American people, because it's not the American people that want this. It's it's another banker war is what it is. Is they sit there and everything in Resolutions 758, which I made a video on it and I read it out, so you know what's in there. Pretty much everything they accuse Russia of doing, they're doing themselves. It's like it's okay when they do it, but not when anybody else does it. If anybody else does that, they're a dictator. But if and regime change is considered an act of terrorism and war, if somebody else does it, so why is it okay when they do it? And this is a question that comes up about foreign policy quite often. Now, in kind of looking at what Russia has just recently done, they have basically redid their military doctrine, and again, if anybody has any doubt that we're not in a new Cold War, I don't know what to tell you. But basically, Russia has now come out and said, pretty. Oh, you couldn't make it again. They're telling us exactly their intentions. And the thing is too many people. Oh no, the Russians are just bluffing. They'll never do it. I don't think the Russians really bluff that. They bluff for certain things, but certain things I don't think they're bluffing. And what they said is they're now going to kind of change their doctrine, where you have to understand the Russian military, as big as it is an offensive military, not or a defensive military, not an offensive military. That could change, because what they come out and say is the number one threat to Russia is basically NATO. That's what they're saying, and they're right. It truly is the NATO expansion. Right up to its borders, all the ships in the Black Sea. The sanctions. So they know that the number one threat to them is NATO. That said, that means anybody who's a part of NATO is a threat to them. So in their new doctrine, what they're also talking about is how they may respond, which could include nuclear missiles. It can include strategic, tactical missiles. It can, all kinds of stuff. But it also removes that kind of, and the Chinese did this in 2012, where they're revisiting that the no first strike policy. This is, the most terrifying. If the Russians do this, okay, the Chinese have already done it, meaning that if they feel threatened enough, they're going to start acting like the United States, doing preemptive strikes on people. And the only people that are ever going to preemptive strike is, North America. Now, some people are out there saying, yeah, this is just a big show. Putin's is controlled by the same guy. Obama's controlled by, the same people. And you have to understand that there is probably some truth to that, but I don't think there's, I think there's a lot of different factions in here. It's not one group of people. The New World Order isn't one group of people. The New World Order is what I just call corrupt elites. So you have your populist faction, you have your communist faction, you have your eugenicist faction, you have your Israeli faction, Zionism and all that. You also have your banking cartel, which are not all Zionists. Some of them are just corrupt bankers. You have the Anglo-American thing. You have the Eurasian Pacific group. You have the Queen. You have there's a whole bunch of different factions here. And then, of course, you just have outright regular day-to-day criminals. People who want to control things, right? They're all control freaks. They're nuts. They're completely clinically insane. Anybody that's going to mess with a nuclear power, and for no reason whatsoever, really, that makes any sense other than depopulation. That's the only reason why they'd be doing this, because even if they're doing it from a kind of command and conquer and steal everybody's resources kind of mentality, which is possible, even at that, it's counterproductive to get into a war, trying to steal somebody else's resources. You're going to have to go about it a different way. You're not going to be able to take the resources that way. Other things that have happened is that the sanctions on Russia... Oh, be quiet, you dog. They're not working the way they said. The Russian ruble, yeah, it's taken a big dive, but it's also recovering. And the Chinese have kind of jumped to the aid of the Russians, saying, okay, well, we'll do a currency swap between... they'll basically help out the Russians, currency right now with... basically with the yuan renminbi, they'll buy some rubles and they'll swap them out, that type of thing, and just to get the Russian economy kind of back onto where it was. Putin also, is saying things like, because there is uprisings in Russia. There's always uprisings in Russia, and China is something like 150 to 175,000 riots a year that they have, and protests. Thing is these countries, they don't let them get out of control. Now, what's going on in Hong Kong, I think it's fizzling out. But every one of these protests, okay, works out the same way. What it is this George Soros-funded group. George Soros admits this all the time. He always says, yeah, it's, we funded this and we funded that. The guy doesn't, he's just simply not a good person. What the heck? Okay. He's just a horrible human being. The thing about it is that even with that said, it was George Soros that was out there not too long saying that, Asia must be the new superpower. So, these guys they're switching the system. They're doing, the pivot to Asia and stuff like that. And the reason why they're going after Russia, it's like I've always said, and it just makes so much sense to me, is Russia has, yes, China has the biggest military in the world numbers-wise, but when we're talking technology, the biggest threat is Russia. Russia has they're pretty much, with exception of a few areas, they're basically, Russia's military is designed to fight NATO. It's always been designed to pretty much fight NATO after World War II. As soon as NATO came along. What they've done, is they pretty much, in a lot of areas outnumber NATO, like in tanks and stuff like that. Aircraft, they're maybe slightly outnumber NATO in some areas. In manpower, they're almost, you're looking at about, if you add up reservists and everything,